Eagles Entertainment.
The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA Roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 21st pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and it is time to start turning the page here on the show. The National Championship game, it's in the books. We reacted to that a little bit earlier this week, and we'll touch on it a little bit here today as well at the end of the show, but I also want to start looking ahead at what this show is going to start looking like in the lead up to the NFL Draft. First up, for the Senior Bowl, my plan is to bring you daily podcasts throughout the week. I will not be there this year, first time since 2018 when the Eagles went on their Super Bowl run. However, we will have boots on the ground because Dane Brugler will be there covering it for The Athletic. I've also got some special segments prepped for you guys throughout the entire week, some interviews that I think you guys are going to like. Locked and loaded, they're ready to share. Hope you guys will really enjoy them. But that's just for that week. Now, for our early week shows for the rest of draft season, you can still expect myself, Ben Fennell, Dane Brugler. The three of us are not going anywhere. The subject matter is going to change a little bit, and we will have some new segments, new twists on some old ones as well that we will continue. So the three of us will start things off every week. But for our late week episodes, like the one you're listening to right now, I will still cycle in different guests in a steady rotation for Mr. Relevant, like I've always done. Try to find some new and informed voices that can bring some new stuff to the show. But for Pick 6, Ben Fennell and I will start looking at a weekly mock draft and pick that apart every single week. But sticking with mock drafts, I know everybody loves them. Everybody loves doing them. Everybody loves reading them. Everyone loves talking about them. But there's nothing worse than reading a mock draft and thinking, what is this writer doing? This team would never pick this position or this kind of player. So here's a new segment, and it's going to start today. It's called The Blueprint. And what we're going to do every single week is we're going to bring on a new guest that covers or follows an NFL team closely and has an idea for how they try to approach team building and their strategy entering the NFL Draft. And we'll kind of pick through some items that will help us when it comes to building our mock drafts and maybe poking holes in how some other mock drafts are being built all across the landscape. So I'm excited about this new segment. It's called The Blueprint. I hope you guys are as well. Now, let's start talking about today's show. First up, we've got Pick 6. Ben Fennell and I are going to look at a mock draft from our friend Dane Brugler and pick out 6 selections that stand out to us, why they're notable, and talk about some of the team fits that we really like. After that, for The Blueprint, Jordan Raanan from ESPN NFL Nation covers the New York Giants, the division rival for the Eagles, and we'll talk about General Manager Dave Gettleman and some of the trends that we see from him over the course of his career as a GM, both in New York and in Carolina. Then we'll wrap things up with Mr. Relevant. This week, Rousseau is going to be back. We're going to talk all about our season-long battle over in Pick 6 throughout the course of the season, but we're also going to take a look at some of the big picture takeaways for Ross coming out of this college football season. He did games all season long. Now, before we get to the start of the show, just a quick reminder, jump onto our Apple Podcast page. Do us that great favor of leaving a rating, leaving a comment, whether it's a mock draft or a question about a specific player, a comment about how much you enjoyed the show, if you're excited about the new segments, if you want something else to be introduced into the show on a weekly basis, that's where you leave those suggestions. That's where you leave those requests and those questions. All those things, a huge, huge boost for us and help make that show a little bit more visible to other fans of the NFL Draft. So appreciate everybody that has taken the time to go through that over on Apple Podcasts, really wherever you listen, whether it's on Stitcher, Google Play, anywhere else. But let's get to this show. Again, we're going to start things off with Ben Fennell in Pick 6.
Now it's time for Pick 6.
All right, let's start now with our new rendition of Pick 6, where throughout the rest of the pre-draft process for Pick 6 here with Ben Fennell, we're going to go through 6 names on a recent mock draft, and we'll kind of break it down. We would do this in our mock draft roundup throughout the fall, but now that we are starting to get into real mock draft season here, Ben, we'll break down a different mock every single week, and we'll pick some picks that we like. We'll try and take a different spin on it every single week, but this week we're just going to pick 6 selections that stand out most to us from our friend Dane Brugler's mock draft.
Well, I'm not picking 6 names. Don't limit me. It's 6 points of conversation. All right. So we're going to be mentioning a lot more than just 6 guys, a couple positional pecking orders, but we trust Dane's mind and eyes and ears.
Well, no question. So I'll let you kick us off here. What's the first point for you just walking away from reading this mock draft?
Well, it's the receivers. It's deep. He has 10 receivers going in the first 2 rounds, and studying the pecking order of a really deep receiver class, I think is pretty important. So in round 1, he has 5 receivers: Devontae Smith, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, and then Kadarius Toney coming in at 32. And then round 2, you have Rashad Bateman, Terrace Marshall, De'Ami Brown, Rondell Moore, Amon-Ra St. Brown. So really interesting to see round 2. And it's another one of these positions. I don't think you're going to find 2 analysts that completely agree on their big board of receivers. So those next 5 receivers, to me, that means you have Tutu Atwell on the board still, Elijah Moore, Amari Rodgers. Where does Tylan Wallace fit into this? Is he going to squeeze into day 3, maybe in round 3? Sage Surratt, who opted out of 2020. So I think this receiver group is really interesting to study. But to see Dane's kind of official top 10 going off the board there is just certainly worth noting.
Was there a fit in particular that from those first 10 that you really enjoyed? Because obviously when you're talking about stacking receivers, every team is going to look at them differently. Was there one specific player team combination that really kind of stuck out to you?
Well, I think every defensive coordinator saw Kadarius Toney fit into the Kansas City Chiefs and said, whoa, wait a minute. They already have Tyreek Hill and McCole Hardman and all these electric athletes. So adding one more to it. Interesting that Dane had 31st overall Green Bay Packers going with an interior defensive lineman, 32 Kansas City Chiefs stealing Kadarius Toney. So yep. I think some fans in the Green Bay community may finally want that first-round receiver to pair with Aaron Rodgers. So interesting fit there.
All right, well, let's go to a player that I thought was a really interesting fit in the first round in the top 15. I look at Minnesota, and I look at Greg Rousseau, the pass rusher from Miami, opted out this year, did not play, but was really productive. I believe one of the leaders in sacks a year ago in 2019. Tall glass of water. He's long. He's lean. He fits the mold of the kind of pass rushers we've seen from Mike Zimmer in the past, and that's why I really like the fit. You talk about guys that that he had when he was out in Cincinnati, guys that he has certainly drafted and acquired since he's been in Minnesota. A lot of guys of that similar kind of body type. You can go back to as far back as like a Carlos Dunlap, when Michael Johnson when he was in Cincinnati. I mean, those were the kinds of guys that he found for that scheme. So I look at Greg Rousseau at 14 for that team. I think that kind of makes some sense there. And by the way, talking about Minnesota, they lose one of their top personnel men in George Payton, who got hired to be the general manager of the Denver Broncos. So a big loss there for the Minnesota front office. But I do like that fit there of Greg Rousseau going to the Vikings at 14.
Can Rousseau ascend and be on a similar trajectory as Danielle Hunter? They have very similar body types and play styles.
Yeah, I think that's what you're hoping for from Rousseau. And we've talked about him going back to the summer. And if you're a listener who's just kind of jumping on, we talked about him a lot over the course of the offseason leading into the regular season. Then he opted out. And when he opted out back in August, the three of us, you, me, Dane, we talked about it. It was like, all right, well, now we're only going off of that one season as a starter when he was a redshirt freshman. I mean, so there's a big projection here from a guy that didn't have a ton of film, didn't make the move to defensive line till his junior year of high school. So just a very small sample size. There's a lot. You're kind of banking on the upside there of Rousseau. And again, there was some. You were doing a little bit of that with Danielle Hunter as well. The difference was that Hunter was a 3rd-round pick and had been a 2-year starter at LSU. Rousseau, a 1-year starter at Miami, very green at the position overall, but he was very productive. Whereas Danielle Hunter, it was the opposite. He had not put up a ton of production during his time with LSU.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's go over to the marquee position. Everybody wants to know about the quarterbacks in round 1. He has 5 go off the board pretty quick. 4 sexy names. We know who they are. Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson and Justin Fields, Trey Lance, Mac Jones squeezing in there in round 1.
Yep.
And then absolute crickets in round 2. No quarterbacks. And Fran, we have to go way back to 2018 since the last time we had no quarterbacks taken in the 2nd round. But it seems like there's starting caliber capital every year in the 2nd round. Whether you could go back to Andy Dalton going early in the 2nd round, Drew Lock a couple years ago, us here in Philadelphia took a flyer on Jalen Hurts in the 2nd round. There's always intriguing talent. So seeing Mac Jones squeeze into the 1st round, that leaves a lot of questions about maybe a Kyle Trask. Where does he fall in all of this? Where does a Kellen Mond fall? Where does a Jamie Newman fall? Are there going to be any day 2 quarterbacks, or is this a receiver tackle type of group on day 2, which it's very much looking like it. So it's interesting that Dane had 5 going round 1, which we expect. but the day 2 quarterback picture is really interesting.
Yeah, I feel like when you talk about quarterbacks on day 2, it's not necessarily a no man's land, but I feel like we view quarterbacks through the prism of, all right, is he a franchise quarterback or is he a backup that's a day 3 guy? It's very rare that you get guys that kind of fall into that gray area. Now, when you go back to Andy Dalton, we're going 2011. That was just when before that new CBA had gotten put in with a 5th-year option for the first-round pick. So it was a little bit different back then. But when you look now, I feel like that's why you typically do see a team, move up to select Lamar Jackson at 31 or take a guy at 30 or 32 because you want to try and make sure you get that extra 5th year. Sometimes you get a guy like a Jalen Hurts, you're like, all right, like the upside is so high here that you can't pass out. That he's not going to be there in round 3. We're going to pull the trigger here in round 2. But I think ultimately it's kind of interesting that quarterbacks are typically viewed through that prism of he's either a franchise guy or he's not.
Yeah, the day 2 quarterback analysis and assessment is so interesting because there's some big misses. You go back to, only a couple of years ago, Deshaun Kaiser was taken in the 2nd round. Davis Webb at Cal was taken in the 3rd round. They barely sniffed the field as potential starting quarterbacks. That was obviously high draft capital. So day 2, you get a lot of maybe some reaches or maybe some teams that had a higher grade and are seeing a guy sitting top on their board, best player available. Let's go pull the trigger.
Well, let's go to my next point here. My second one is going to be looking around the NFC East. And we saw the New York Giants last year select a left tackle with the 3rd overall pick, Andrew Thomas out of Georgia. Well, now you look at the Washington football team at 19, you look at the Dallas Cowboys at 10, and Dane has both of these squads going with left tackles. Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern, Elijah Vera-Tucker out of USC. Now, what's interesting about both guys is that they have position flexibility. Both guys have played tackle over the course of their career. Slater has played all left tackle. Tucker didn't play left tackle until this year for the Trojans, but a lot of people feel Slater could be a guard down the road, even a center down the road, and Tucker has played a lot of guard. So with both guys, there's value in the fact that, if this guy could be a tackle, but if not, could be a very, very good guard. Dallas has done this in the past with Zach Martin. Washington has done it in the past with Brandon Scherf. So do they try and go back to those same kind of wells and try and get players that can impact the offensive line in that same vein? Dallas obviously getting a little bit older. Washington, Brandon Scherf is a free agent this year. You don't know what's really going on with the future of the left tackle position there. So I think it's kind of an interesting fit, but also interesting kind of historical reflections on how those teams have prioritized the offensive line in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rashawn Slater's comp for me is Joel Bitonio, who coming out of Nevada played a lot of tackle and was immediately projected in to play the guard position with the Cleveland Browns, and they've been more than happy with that. So we've talked tackle and quarterback, receiver, edge, the deep groups, the very top-heavy groups. Where aren't we heavy this year? Where is it not top-heavy? And Dane pretty much gives us the snapshot. In the first 2 rounds, 1 center, and that's Josh Myers over Creed Humphrey, over Landon Dickerson. We'll see where the injury puts Dickerson. We'll see what Creed Humphrey can maybe go do at the Senior Bowl to maybe put himself back ahead of Josh Myers. The tight end position, we know Kyle Pitts is going in round 1. Freiermuth looks like he's going in round 2. Who's that next one off the board? Is it Brevin Jordan? Is it maybe a Hunter Long on, later into day 2? Is it a Kenny Yeboah out of nowhere? And the running back group, 2 running backs in 2 rounds. Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, we kind of know who those guys are. Who's next is the question. Is it going to be the Chubba Hubbards of the world, or is there going to be somebody out of left field like a Kenneth Gainwell, a Puka Williams? I think those positions, running back, tight end, center, or interior offensive lineman in general, not some of the top heavy groups of this year's draft. So I always like looking at the positional depth each year. And then finally, just want to cover the linebacking group. We all kind of thought Dylan Moses was that cream of the crop just after Micah Parsons. He's linebacker 6. It goes Parsons, JOK, Zaven Collins, and all different sizes. JOK 215, Zaven Collins is what, 255?
Yep.
Crazy we call these guys all linebackers. Nick Bolton looks like a Devin Bush clone. Chaz Surratt squeezing in there at linebacker 5. Then Dylan Moses, linebacker 6, how far he's fallen since that ACL tear. Just hasn't quite looked the same on the field in 2020. But suddenly that linebacker group, a lot of shapes and sizes and ability. I think it's kind of a fun group.
Yeah, I think that linebacker group this year is a really interesting one. We'll talk about one of them here in a couple minutes. But my last point is going to be about going back to the receiver position. You mentioned him earlier, Chris Olave from Ohio State, going 29 to the New Orleans Saints. And to me, that was the fit. When you start talking about who kind of makes sense, I think Olave really makes sense for the Saints. And you talk about some of the players that they've acquired in the past in terms of their skill set. He looks like, I was talking with, Greg Cosell last week, and we were talking about some of the players that he is starting to kind of dive into. And I asked him about Chris Olave, and he said, who you're kind of reminds me of is Kenny Stills. And Stills obviously got drafted by the New Orleans Saints early on, had that same kind of straight line juice, that ability to attack down the field. I think Olave has that. I think Olave has a little bit more snap in terms of his ability to kind of create that separation. Very, very deliberate. We talked about how great his feet have been over the course of, studying him on film. But I think when you look at Olave down in New Orleans, I think that makes a lot of sense that he would be lethal in that offense with what they've already got put together from a passing game standpoint. So I just really like that fit there for Olave down in the Bayou.
Yeah, that'd be a really fun combination with Mike Thomas and Alvin Kamara. Kenny Stills, I thought, had a little bit of a thicker frame to him. Olave is a little taller, a little skinnier in the lower half. I compared to a Stevie Johnson or a Keenan Allen.
Yeah, right.
When you just watch him, he's a dynamic release package. He's dynamic getting in and out of breaks. He's got the vertical speed. He can adjust to the ball, whether it's down the field, the catch point, along the sideline. He looks like a guy that, I don't care what his production share is at a well-distributed offense in Ohio State, but he's a guy that might end up being a better pro on Sundays.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite players in this draft. I think when you get outside of like who are the top blue chip players, like he was just talking about, who are the guys that are going to go, mid round one, late round one, getting into day two. I really like.
And he has a track background, so he might turn some heads at the combine a little bit more than you expect. Yeah, I know he has some. I think he showed up on the freak list over the summer, if I'm not mistaken. But he was a long jumper out of high school, 100-meter guy out of high school. I think he's ready to jump out the building, maybe the way Donovan Peoples-Jones did last year as well.
All right, well, let's wrap it up with who Dane had the Eagles taking in this mock draft. At 6 overall, he has the Eagles taking wide receiver Jamar Chase out of LSU. Here's the blurb from Dane here. Regardless of their quarterback situation, the Eagles need more firepower on offense. Chase, who had 84 catches last season, went for over 1,700 yards and 20 touchdowns. Both were SEC records, has the gear-changing acceleration and elite finishing skills that make him an immediate NFL weapon. And in the second round, he had the Eagles selecting linebacker Nick Bolton out of Missouri. So 2 SEC stars there for the Eagles from Dane. What are your thoughts there on that pairing, I guess, of Jamar Chase and Nick Bolton and the fit here in Philadelphia for both guys?
I think those two guys that are ready to contribute to an NFL team immediately. I love Nick Bolton. I think he's going to give somebody great value if he can fall to day 2 in the second round there. He's a guy we've compared to Devin Bush, who the Steelers had no problem trading up and grabbing him, I think, in the top 10 2 years ago. But Jamar Chase is a guy that I think can line up all over the offensive formation. He's a guy that a lot of work for himself. So I think he can play in some isolation situations as well, can win at all levels of the defense. He is so strong for him in his releases, his route stems at the catch point, and then we know what he does with the ball in his hands. 41 plays of 15-plus yards in 2019, led the country. Tons of broken tackles after the catch. He's a guy that's really strong and plays with a little bit of a, pardon my language, but an FU type of attitude, which I think that's really going to fit into Philadelphia, and the fans are going to love a kid like that.
Just a really violent player. Both guys, honestly, are very violent players. When you look at Bolton and you look at Chase, really fun.
There's not a lot of finesse. Not a lot of finesse.
No, both guys, honestly, are to me are my favorite players in the draft. So Nick Bolton in round 2. I know we're talking about that now. That's kind of like a very posh pick for the Eagles there early in the second round. I would view that as a steal as well early into the second round. But all right, Ben, this was fun. We're going to do this every single week here in Pick 6. We'll kind of break down a different mock draft every single week. But this one was fun. We'll talk to you a little bit later next week with Dane. Now, we've been talking mock drafts all through this segment, so we're going to now debut a new segment here on the show. It's called The Blueprint. We're going to talk with Jordan Raanan from ESPN.
All 32 teams are always under construction. How are they being built? Let's check out the blueprint.
Well, joining us for our very first edition of The Blueprint here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA, Jordan Raanan. You can follow him on Twitter. You can go check him out, ESPN NFL Nation, covering the New York Giants. Jordan, welcome to the show, man.
Appreciate it, Fran. What's going on over there?
It's just another day, man. There's
anything going on?
Yeah, obviously, a lot going on here in Philadelphia. But we are not here to talk about the Eagles today, Jordan. We are here to talk about the New York Giants. And,
all right, let's do it.
That's right. Namely, the history and the tendencies when it comes to the NFL draft of general manager Dave Gettleman. He will be back for the 2021 NFL draft, for the 2021 NFL season. So I guess I want to start things off with this. Okay. Are there a couple of trends that you guys know when you're closely following the team that maybe everybody else needs to know when they're keeping in mind, like how to kind of pencil in players for the Giants when it comes to mock drafts? Are there certain tendencies that kind of come to mind when you think of Dave Gettleman?
Yeah, look, it's always going to start with the trenches for him, right? I mean, that's you go back and look at his some of his top picks in Carolina. It was the defensive line. Last year, they knew that their offensive line needed to be fixed. They drafted 3 offensive linemen, in their top 6 picks?
Yep.
5 picks. And it was like the first time in history. So, yeah, Dave Gettleman is going to start with the lines. That's his priority, the trenches. Now, the Giants have addressed that a lot in the last couple of years. So maybe, they realize they have to go in a different direction now. But I don't think he's not all of a sudden going to be shy and say, hey, I like this offensive lineman. We're good there. We're set. Like the Giants offensive line was still probably below average.
Sure.
This past season. So yeah, there's promise there, but there's still work to be done for sure.
So, we know the term hog mollies gets thrown around, obviously, with those guys. So
Gettleman
much importance.
That.
No question. And even going back to Carolina, I remember they drafted, they had a couple of big time defensive tackles, and then he still shocked everybody and took Vernon Butler, in the first round, at the end of the first round. So, he'll keep filling up those spots on the trenches. We know what he's done at the defensive line there in New York, for sure. Is there another, concept that we need to kind of make sure we keep in the back of our mind here?
Well, I mean, when we're talking about line, right? Rushing the passer is part of that, an edge rusher. And the Giants, you have to be realistic. I mean, they know it. They have a gigantic hole at edge rusher. I mean, they were at times not even playing with an edge rusher because they really didn't have anyone that they could put out there consistently. So they were trying to find ways around it. And that's not the way anybody wants to live in the NFL. Dave Gettleman also, rushing the passer is a big part of his belief system. Stopping the run, running the football, rushing the passer, and playing quality special teams. Those are like right near the top of the list of what Dave Gettleman believes in as a general manager. And I think that'll certainly play. And the Giants also conceded. Dave Gettleman said it, and John Mara said it after the season, that it's their goal this offseason to add playmakers. And so the way I take that is that we're not just talking wide receivers or guys on offense. That means offensively and defensively. And those playmakers on defense start with guys that can rush the passer, create negative plays, create turnovers, strip sacks, fumbles. So they would like that. That's going to be near the top of the list for sure.
It's funny that you said that quote, because that's actually one of the ones I have written down in my notes just about Dave Gettleman. It was like one of his first press conferences as general manager. He said, "You must run the ball, stop the run, and rush the passer." I believe in those 3 truths, and I know he's repeated that numerous times during his tenure. Is there
the funny part, Fran, is we're sitting here 3 years later. The offensive line really isn't that good. The running game hasn't been great because Saquon Barkley in the offensive line was injured in the last 2 years, and the offensive line hasn't been good, and they're pass rush is nowhere to be found. They literally have 0 edge rushers on the roster signed. So it's ironic he said that, and I do believe he believes it.
Right.
But have they really solidified those spots? I think the answer, even he'll tell you at this point, the answer is no. It's a work in progress.
Yeah, it's been a lot of, guys that were drafted in the 3rd and 4th round that haven't quite reached that ceiling yet. And, mid-level free agents, they haven't made that first blue chip investment yet. And we'll see if they're able to do that here this spring. Is there one third one here, Jordan, that we need to kind of walk away from this conversation, really making sure we take into account?
In regards to need for this team? Or
just like
Gettleman's beliefs?
More like a Dave Gettleman belief.
Yeah. Look, they know where they're at in regards to the secondary. Like they look, it's not his top priority, and this is the interesting part. When they were in Carolina, that the one thing they didn't do was get cornerbacks, right?
Right.
Like that was kind of the knock on him. They didn't fill that position. And then when he knew it was a huge need, he went that one draft and he said it was a mistake, but he pounded the cornerback position because he concentrated more on need. And that's when you end up, he always says that's when you end up making the mistakes. When you're drafting strictly for need and not basically relying on your board and just going with who the better players are, it makes you push players up. And then that's how you make mistakes. And I think in one draft, would they take like 4 cornerbacks? I think it was.
Yes, correct. I remember it was
maybe like 17 or something.
I was just going to say, I'm pretty sure it was the 17 draft. It might have been the 16 draft.
Yeah. And so that's the reality is I think that's where James Bradbury ended up coming, right? Did he?
Yep. No question. That's why when they signed him in free agency
maybe he was 16,
year,
but yeah.
I mean, the connection certainly was there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, they're not going to ignore the fact that they really had one cornerback this year that they could trust. I mean, they started 4 or 5 different guys at that second cornerback spot this year. Yep. They know they need to add depth in that part. So even though he said he probably, it was a mistake to overdo it, I do think that he's somebody who recognizes what the needs are when there are dire needs, and that is a dire need to add depth to that secondary and in regard to that cornerback position. And that's something I think when we enter this draft, we're going to see him address as well.
Yeah, you talked about, just kind of his feeling on need versus best player available. Where do you kind of land on that regarding Dave Gettleman and the Giants for this upcoming draft? Do you feel that they're going to really just say, all right, like we know we need edge rush, we know we need secondary, that's going to be the priority? Or do you feel that if a player were to fall to them, let's say at number 11 overall in the first round, that maybe he isn't an edge rusher or a secondary member, but they would just be too good to pass up?
And the wide receivers definitely in play here too. Look, the way they work is that, and I believe this is that they try to marry need, and every team does this. They try to marry, the talent level with need, right? And you hope you hope it matches up. Okay, so they have some pretty big needs, right? They need a number 1 wide receiver. The Giants do. They need another cornerback would definitely fit. An outside linebacker, edge rusher, 100,000%. Even if it's an interior rusher, that would fit too. So there's a lot of needs. So there's a lot of ways to go. Now we'll see how the draft plays out. But wide receiver, and like I said before, playmaker. That the Giants haven't been shy. Remember, Dave Gettleman was still part of this organization for a long time.
Sure, this
organization hasn't been shy about drafting wide receivers. They do view it as a premium position. You're talking about Odell Beckham really high in the draft. Akeem Nicks was drafted high in the draft. Steve Smith back in the day. Remember Steve Smith?
Second round.
Second rounder?
Yep.
I believe. He ended up playing for the Giants and the Eagles. And Sterling Shepard was a second-round pick. So using valuable assets near the top of the draft on a wide receiver is not something this organization, and they're at least philosophically, organizationally, that they're against. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if they go that direction. And this is going to be a really good wide receiver draft. I know you guys are going to be talking about that for, months and months and months here.
Sure. Yep.
But there's some really good wide receivers. I don't know. I'm not that deep into it, but preliminarily, when you look at it, it doesn't look like it's a great edge rusher draft. So it might fit better in regards to need versus value when the Giants are picking and they draft 11th. That wide receiver could easily fall into that category.
Yeah, it certainly will be a big one. I know Devontae Smith is a connection a lot of people are making. With that in mind, are there any schools that when it comes to Dave Gettleman or this coaching staff with Joe Judge and the guys that they have there on that coaching staff, are there any schools, programs in particular that you feel like, hey, this is kind of a special connection to keep in mind? Because I'm a big believer that you have to kind of play into the human element of this and that those relationships matter between the NFL staffs and college staffs.
No, go look at their draft last year. Who were their first 2 picks alone? It's Andrew Thomas and Xavier McKinney.
Yep.
Right? This is an SEC staff the Giants have assembled. Joe Judge worked at Alabama. Freddie Kitchens worked at Mississippi State and Alabama. So did Joe Judge. Go down that roster. Their linebackers coach came from Tennessee, I believe.
Yep.
Joe Judge even talked about it when they drafted Andrew Thomas. He had talked to Kirby Smart.
Yep.
Because Kirby Smart has Alabama background, right? So like these guys, this is a huge SEC staff. I mean, they're going to use their connections, and Joe Judge is big on that, of using those personal relationships.
Yep.
He hired all guys basically, and he's not shy about saying this, that he knows, that he can trust, that he has personal relationships with. It's the same with drafting guys. They're going to take guys that they can trust as much as you can in the draft process, right? By talking to people that they know around college football. And it starts with the SEC, which is a good place to start, by the way.
Sure.
That's a pretty good conference. So I don't think in any way, shape, or form it was an accident that the Giants' first 2 picks last year were from Georgia and Alabama.
Yeah. I think it's certainly, you got to play in those connections. And I know Dave Gettleman has talked about that. One of the things that has stood out, to me, going back and looking at Gettleman's history as a general manager, he doesn't like to take risks on a lot of guys. There have been very few really big, like red flags, whether you talk from a character standpoint, a medical standpoint, even an athleticism and speed standpoint.
That's a very Giant philosophy.
No question. I think that's you could tell.
He brought it with him to Carolina, right? Exactly.
No question. And I feel like that's something really important to kind of take into consideration as well. With all this being said,
actually, Fran, let me just add to that. I think with Joe Judge, you can actually, it's even more so that direction. Like, he is so focused on making sure he has the right guys for his program that I think that risk mitigation that you're kind of talking about there is even amplified a little bit more at this point, because they're still trying to build. So they want the right people in the building. Then once you have the right people and the right culture and the right foundation, then you could start adding guys, maybe, take a flyer here or there on some guys who maybe will be a little more questionable in regards to character. But you have to have that foundation first. And I still think they're in that foundation building phase.
That's a really great point. I'm glad that you brought that up. With that being said, and look, it's early, right? It's the middle of January. We still have 4 months to go here. But with the names that are kind of being thrown around with the Giants, with the 11th pick in the draft, are there guys that, in your mind, with all the things that we talked about today, make sense? And then are there a couple guys that you're like, yeah, I would not mock this guy to the Giants at all? And you kind of see that right now. Is there guys on both sides of the coin that kind of fit those descriptions for you?
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the wide receivers, like if Jalen Waddle made it to like 11, that's something like that I think would be intriguing. I mean, Jamar Chase, if by some miracle he was still there. Right. It's really interesting. Who knows? This draft is so unknown because some of these guys didn't even play.
Yep.
So it's like, all right, we saw Jamar Chase, who basically had the same season. I mean, if you go look at their numbers, they're almost similar, at least heading into the championship game. If you put Devonta Smith and Jamar Chase, and he played next to Justin Jefferson, we're talking about Jamar Chase. So, like, where does he fall in now? Like, where would Devonta Smith actually get drafted? I mean, I know Eagles fans will probably like to hear this, but I have doubts whether he's drafted in the top 5. 100%. Guys that small in the NFL, there's not a great history.
Yep.
I mean, we're the last small wide receivers drafted. Was it Tavon Austin, John Ross?
Yeah, that's the concern.
Marquise Brown. I mean, go along the list. It's not overly encouraging. And somebody brought up Odell Beckham. I don't kind of put him in that category. He's much more stockier and bigger kind of guy. He wasn't skinny.
Right, exactly.
So it'll be interesting to see where a guy like that goes. Like, I would have a hard time, Fran, seeing the Giants. Now, granted, they pick 11th, so if he dropped there, the value might be too good. But like a player like Devonta Smith, who is that size at wide receiver, I could see the Giants having problems settling on a guy like that at that kind of spot.
Do you think Kyle Pitts would be in play, the tight end from Florida? Do you feel like that would be a potential for them? But obviously, knowing Evan Ingram, a similar kind of skill set.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a little hard for me to see that bit. I don't know enough about Kyle Pitts' blocking.
Right. Yep.
But I feel like in order to justify a tight end being drafted, the Giants are an organization that would value the blocking part of it a little more.
Interesting.
And also, tight end is another position. These guys that keep coming out and they're tight ends in the first round, there's not a great track record on these guys either.
Sure.
There really isn't. Who was the last one to be drafted super high? O.J. Howard?
Yeah, I mean, T.J. Hawkinson went 9, a couple of two years ago. Yeah,
good players, but I mean, none of them have really it's a weird position if you ask me, because the studs at the position, I mean, over the last decade, it's like Gronk, Kittle, none of these guys were super high picks. It's really crazy. Jimmy Graham. I mean, it's a wild position. So I don't think, unless Pitts would be considered a dominant blocker, in addition to being, we know he's a freakish pass catcher, that would be the direction that the Giants would want to lean. Because remember, they took that risk. They had a guy who could, they knew wasn't a blocker and was like a chess piece, a pass catcher. His name is Evan Ingram.
Right.
And I know he made the Pro Bowl, but he had a rough year this year. He hasn't blossomed into the receiver man he wanted. So I don't know. I'm wishy-washy on that. Let me get back to me in a month or two. I could probably have a better answer for you.
Yep.
But I don't know. My gut at this point is telling me, man, I would have a hard time seeing that happen now. I could see them, like I said, going on the lines, getting a defensive lineman, an edge rusher, somebody who's going to, help them run the ball or stop the run or, rush the passer. Like we said, those are the main three things, being a priority again here, whether people like it or not, because, they have Leonard Williams and Dalvin Tomlinson. This is why you can't rule out defensive line at all.
Yeah, sure.
Leonard Williams and Dalvin Tomlinson are both free agents.
Yeah,
it's possible one of them walks and goes, and the Giants have to replenish in the draft. They've done that before. They let Linval Joseph walk, and then they replaced him with Jonathan Hankins. They let Jonathan Hankins walk, and then replaced him with Dalvin Tomlinson. So there's a track record there as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun team to just kind of evaluate, obviously picking it right in the meat there of the first round at 11 overall. Jordan, thanks so much for joining us, man. This will be a fun segment to do every single week, and I was happy to have you be the one to kind of kick things off for us right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, excited to welcome in my friend Ross Tucker. You can follow him on Twitter at Ross Tucker NFL. You can follow the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. You guys know all the podcasts Ross is a big part of, and he's been here every single week picking games with me all college football season long. Ross, our competition came to an end. Would you like to know how this last game went for us on Monday night?
Probably not, but go ahead.
All right, so it came in. I had a 4-game lead coming in. We both hit on Justin Fields with the under on 3.5 touchdown passes. He only threw 1, so I maintained my 4-game lead. You took the under on 1.5 ball disruptions for Patrick Surtain. He only had 1, so now you cut into my lead now up to 3. You took Devontae Smith's yards per catch in the game. I took Chris Olave. Olave only had 8.6. Devontae Smith 17.9. So you cut into 2 with 3 to go. We both hit on Najee Harris points over Trey Sermon's yards per carry. So no, it's 2 again. I got a 2-point lead. I'm starting to sweat this out a little bit. However, I took the Alabama margin of victory. You took the tackles by the total tackles by the leading tacklers in the game. I ended up getting the win there, and then I took Alabama over Ohio State and got the win. So it was a fun one, man. It was fun to kind of do this all week long. I know I came out on top, but it came down to the final week, and it was really over the last couple picks.
It was close. It was very close. And I would have picked Alabama, but I had to go for it at the end. So it would have been a 2-game thing, I guess.
Yeah, it would have been very close. Or it was very close, but it would have been very, very close. Obviously you had to go for Ohio State there to try and claw back. But look, I wanted to talk about not just that game, but a few other just kind of season reflective questions here with you. Coming out of Monday night, what was your big takeaway coming from watching the game? Just pick one thing, just one profound statement. If you've got one thing just walking away, what would it be?
Alabama's player development is incredibly impressive.
Yep.
Even just take a look at 4 guys, Fran. Mac Jones, Najee Harris, Devontae Smith, Landon Dickerson. Compare what those guys were like in 2019 versus what they were like in 2020. I mean, Najee Harris goes from a 3rd-round pick, maybe 4th-round pick, to maybe now a late first. Devontae Smith goes from maybe a late first to now top 10. Mac Jones goes from whatever he was to now being a very legit prospect. And Landon Dickerson wasn't really that highly thought of, and now he's very highly thought of. I mean, even in a pandemic year, their player development is incredibly impressive for all those guys to make as big of a leap as they did from last year to this year. I guess that and Steve Sarkisian really impressing me with his schemes to get Devontae Smith open.
Yeah, no question about it. And you mentioned Landon Dickerson, that moment of him going out on the field with the torn ACL and snapping the ball to close the game out, just one of the best moments in college football all season. So that now brings me to my next question. Who was the most fun player you saw all season long? You've been doing games all season long for radio and for TV. Was there a player that you saw in person that really was just, you walked away saying, like, this guy was just the most, gave me the most juice walking away watching him live?
Yeah, so there's two that jumped out to me, and they're both running backs, actually. One is University of Buffalo running back Jarrett Patterson.
Had to be. Yeah,
I mean, I did one game. He had 412 yards or something and 8 touchdowns, and nobody ever really gets a clean shot on him. He's got more juice and explosiveness than I realized. Really good vision, low to the ground. He's good. I mean, he is hard to tackle. And so, look, that's the one game I did of UB, and he should have broken every record there ever was. So I think I have to say him. The other one, just in terms of fun, is Army fullback Jacoby Buchanan. He's only a sophomore, Fran. He comes into training camp at 280 every year. They get him down to 260. He played lacrosse in high school, but he was Army's leading rusher. He had a bunch of touchdowns, including the game winner against Air Force. And it's just fun to see a 6-foot, 260-pound guy that has pretty good feet. He kind of reminds me of, like, he's not this level of player, but in terms of style, like a Jerome Bettis, right? Like a really big dude that's light on his feet. He's got tremendous balance. He actually has like jump cuts, slides. He's really fun to watch. And if you didn't watch Army football this year, it's just fun to watch a 260-pound guy get the ball that much.
And obviously they had an outstanding season this year, with what the Black Knights were able to do. Really, really fun to watch. A couple more questions for you. Number one, who deserves more love? Who's a guy that you feel is just underrated right now that, when we're talking about just purely from an NFL draft standpoint, is not getting the attention they deserve, at this point in the process?
I think a lot of the guys that opted out probably fall into this category, Fran.
Okay. Yep.
And probably rightfully so. But for me, it's Sage Surratt from Wake Forest, the wide receiver. I did his game against Rice last year. I watched him against Utah State. He's really big, really smooth, really physical, terrific hands. We can debate whether or not he made the right move opting out. And Chaz Surratt at North Carolina is his brother, right?
He is.
It's so interesting that they're both in the same draft class. One opted out, one didn't. I guess for their respective positions, Chaz is a little bit more agile and explosive, but Sage Surratt was a basketball player till like his senior year. He was state player of the year in North Carolina in basketball, which gives you an indicator of, who he reminds me of, Fran?
Who's that?
Vincent Jackson.
Okay, yeah.
Remember Vincent Jackson of the Chargers and the Bucks? Surratt is just that type of powerful, smooth. I think he's going to have a really good career. I think he's kind of gotten overshadowed by Jamar Chase and Devontae Smith, and he opted out this year, so people aren't talking about him. But I really think he's going to be a player.
Yeah, I liked him over the summer doing his film. I'll be interested to see ultimately how he tests. I think that will be really, really big for him over the course of the next couple of months. And speaking of the next couple of months, is there a guy that you're just excited to learn more about? Obviously, you don't have you don't have eyes on every single prospect, but from what you've been able to see, like kind of peripherally and what people are talking about, is there a guy that you're just excited to learn more about over the next few months as we get closer to the draft in April?
Yes, and that is Trey Smith from Tennessee. Now, you got to fill me in on this, Fran. Did he have a bad year? I want to know what happened that he's dropped in a lot of the rankings, because all I know is watching him coming into this year, watching him the last couple of years when he's been healthy, He was the meanest, most physical O-lineman in college football. That's what I enjoy. That's what I embrace. That's what I love. And so to see him being at the bottom of some of these top 100s or mock drafts, I need to learn more about what happened there.
Sure. Yeah, he had a little bit of an up and down season. So I'm excited to dig a little bit deeper into the tape as well. I know our friends Ben Fennell and Dane Brugler have done a lot of work on Trey Smith, but I agree with you. I'm excited to dig deeper into that film. Ross, it's been fun doing this every single week here on Pick Six. We'll be talking with you soon for sure. Obviously, you'll be a big part of what we do with all of our draft coverage over on PhiladelphiaEagles.com. Thanks so much again. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely, man. Totally enjoyed it. Loved it all season. It was a blast.
Hope you guys enjoyed today's show. We had 3 great guests. We had Ben Fennell. You've got Jordan Raanan. You got Ross Tucker. Hope you guys enjoyed all 3 conversations as we get closer and closer to the Senior Bowl. Well, next week, we'll start looking ahead at some of the players you need to know for that week. But like I said, we've got a lot planned here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Everybody enjoy a great weekend. We'll talk to you earlier next week.
Raise a glass to that comforting feeling of an Eagles touchdown with the all-new Broad & Patterson wine collection created in partnership with Wink, featuring a Cabernet, a Rosé, and a Chardonnay. Broad & Patterson wines are the perfect pairing for any occasion. Now you can bring the sweet taste of victory with you to a dinner with friends or to the tailgate with your game day crew. Purchase online today at PhiladelphiaEagles.com/wine to stock up and have Broad & Patterson delivered right to your door. A portion of proceeds from every bottle benefit Eagles Autism Foundation.